before there's any kind of a decision, that's a decision to employ you as an advisor, a decision to use a product or a service. Before there's a decision, there has to be engagement. And before there's engagement, there has to be attention. And believe it or not, it's very hard to capture your client's attention just with the promise of Monte Carlo simulations, asset liability management, all those kind of things that, the analytical stuff that kind of made up the basis and foundation of our profession for so long.
I'm psyched today, guys, to have someone join us who I have tremendous respect for. You may have seen him or heard of him speak in the past. His name's John Diehl. He's the head of applied insights at Hartford Funds. I work with John. God, it's been almost 10 years since I've worked with John, but I have tremendous respect for him. His message is fantastic. And I thought having him on today to speak with us for the first, 30 minutes and share what he's seeing, the forefront of investor behavior, how, your clients and your prospects are aging up into and through retirement, and things for you all and all of us to consider. So I thought it'd be fun to bring John on, have him talk to us, and then you guys can ask questions, and, this will just be a different kind of meeting. So John, with that, I'll continue to add advisors as they pile in, but you've got the floor.
Great. Thanks, Corey. And thanks everyone for taking a few minutes this morning. So by way of introduction, Corey and I worked together for quite a few years, but I've been with Hartford Funds now just shy of 35 years. But the last 20 years, I've actually spent heading our consumer research with the Age Lab at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. So my role at Hartford Funds is really twofold. One is I've been a certified financial planner since 1991. So part of my job is to shape the research agenda as it concerns financial services, changes in the service offerings, and really demographic change in the client base that we look forward to serving in future years. That's kind of the research agenda. And then the other part of my job is to manage a team of 6 professional presenters, which all we do is, pre-pandemic, and now it seems like starting September post-pandemic, travel the country 3 to 4 days a week, 3 to 4 different cities a week, speaking with groups of financial advisors like yourselves, speaking at conferences, but probably most important and near and dear to my heart because it drives the research agenda, speaking to clients. We'll probably do in the course of any given year about 16 to 1700 client meetings a year on all different topics relating to longevity and lifestyle. So just want to give you a little background on the MIT Age Lab, and then I want to kind of just take a few minutes to fill you in on some of the things that the researchers at MIT are telling us today about shifting demographics, the impact of technology, and shifting lifestyles, and how that may impact our business going forward. So the MIT Age Lab is made up of about 40 researchers up on MIT's main campus, just across the Charles River in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Not all the researchers are engineers. Obviously at MIT, engineering is well represented, but there's a host of psychologists, physiologists, sociologists. I say a whole team of ologists, right? Studying how the impact of technology and changing longevity is shaping consumer lives. The best part about working with MIT is that they don't just work in the financial services space. In fact, I probably learned more about our business from listening to other industries and how they're adapting. So, for example, probably the single largest client of the MIT Age Lab is the auto industry. There's hardly an automaker that isn't working with MIT, not just on autonomous driving, but it's actually where our relationship with MIT started a few years ago, because Hartford, our parent company, is the auto insurer for the AARP. And back in 1999, we realized that accident rates and auto insurance, or accident rates and aging, were running in parallel. And so we became a founding sponsor of the MIT Age Lab, largely to study 2 things. One was automotive technology. So some of you today probably drive automobiles that have reverse monitoring systems, blind spot warning systems, smart headlights, automatic braking, and the like. What you may not know is a lot of those technologies were rooted in the study of the aging driver. And we have been successful in kind of minimizing accidents among and a later driving population. But the other thing we noticed is that I don't know if any of you have ever had to experience this, but what's a good way to have the conversation with mom or dad about when it's time to give up the keys, right? If you've ever had that conversation, it's something nobody wants to do. Medical doctors don't want to do it. Kids don't want to do it. And so we began actually studying the psychological impacts and environments in which we might successfully navigate that difficult situation. So good news is, auto accident rates have been declining as time has moved on, but that's just one practical implementation of kind of the work at MIT. The other, I will tell you, and it's becoming more and more important, especially in terms of financial planning practices, is that MIT does a lot of work with the retail industries. And two things here. So one of the research techniques MIT has is they have a suit that you can put on that actually it replicates what it would feel like to be somewhere between 80 and 85 years old, restrictive movements in the limbs, vision impairment, and the like. We use this with retailers to kind of shape the customer experience. So for example, CVS is a member of the MIT Age Lab. And the executives were curious a few years ago about how to redesign their stores to accommodate an aging US population. What better way than to take the senior execs, drop them in the Agnes suit, dial them up to age 80 and go shopping in your own stores. So as you go to reach for that high volume item on the top shelf and you can't quite get there, or you try to kind of shrink down to pick up that thing on the bottom shelf, they redesign their shelving, they redesign store layouts. So the research they're doing is having practical implications. But here's something that I think our industry needs to learn from the retail industry. So I want you to think for a second about the last retail experience where you would say that was a remarkable experience. And I'll define remarkable as you told someone else what happened. Now, when I say that, a remarkable experience, you may be thinking about a restaurant, maybe it was a vacation, a hotel stay, whatever pops into your mind. My guess is that whoever you're thinking of delivered on your expectation. If it was a restaurant, the meal was really good, right? Hotel, the hotel was really clean. But my second guess is the reason why an experience stuck out in your mind as remarkable is that somebody did something during the course of that experience that made it stand out in your mind. They personalized something. They taught you something that you didn't realize before. You see, the key to a remarkable experience, and what MIT calls it, is how do we excite and delight our clients, is that oftentimes we need to do something to surprise on the upside. In other words, your clients are coming to your offices because they already anticipate that you have the competence, the skills, and the resources to produce decent investment results, right? If they didn't expect that, they wouldn't be in your office in the first place. That's what's expected. But here's the problem. It's very hard to excite and delight in a realm of expected services. You can satisfy, but in order to excite and delight, we need to go beyond. We need to do something that they didn't expect. And in many cases, what we need to do is anticipate issues that they may have coming down the pike that they don't even know that they have yet. How do we do that? Well, I'll talk about this a little bit, but MIT says the single most important tool that you as financial advisors have are not the analytical tools on your desk. By the way, it's because of technology. Technology is actually changing the financial planning landscape. Think about it, 20, 30 years ago, when your clients needed a very complex portfolio put together, it was up to us to do all the manual analytical work. Today, technology has shortened the amount of time that we need to spend on that piece of it. I'm not going to say it doesn't need human intervention. I think it does. I don't think robo-advisors are ready to come in and take over the world yet. However, none of us can deny that technology has both shortened the time that we need to spend in analysis, but also in terms of perception, technology has now convinced a portion of the US population that if I only had the right tools and the time, I could probably figure out this planning thing myself. And I just want to touch on some of the demographic changes that are driving that. However, if you'll agree with me that technology has pushed down and continues to push down marginal profitability of asset management. I mean, some firms now are saying they're giving away stock trades or they're giving away financial plans as loss leaders. What makes up the white space between the true cost of asset management and the fee that we charge our clients? We would argue that what's in that white space is the advice and insights that you as a human being can give to your clients in terms of empathetic identification with the transitions that they're moving through. So maybe so again, MIT would say the most valuable tools that you have are not the analytical tools on your desktop or in your pocket or wherever. It's the stories that you've curated over the course of your career. It's either stories that you yourself have personally experienced, or it's the stories of other people in a similar transition to the same people who are sitting across the desk from you right now. You see, MIT believes that before there's any kind of a decision, that's a decision to employ you as an advisor, decision, even as looking at ourselves as consumers, a decision to use a product or a service. Before there's a decision, there has to be engagement. And before there's engagement, there has to be attention. And believe it or not, it's very hard to capture your client's attention just with the promise of Monte Carlo simulations, asset liability management, all those kind of things that, the analytical stuff that kind of made up the basis and foundation of our profession for so long. So I just want to share a couple of slides with you, Corey. I'm not going to hit on every one of these slides, but I want to point out a couple of slides that I think would be particularly relevant for you. And I want to share with you what MIT calls their model of the future of financial advice. Before I do share this with you, because I always forget to do it, I will let you guys know slides, white papers, everything are available on our website at hartfordfunds.com. There's a tab called Practice Management. And under that, you can find all of our MIT related content. Also, usually, I guess it's about twice a month, they publish podcasts. They're hosted by me and one of the ladies who works with me, where we often interview Dr. Joe Coughlin that heads the Age Lab, as well as other industry experts. It's called the Human Centric Investing Podcast. And if you like podcasts, just check it out. We try to keep them to 20-minute episodes, but solely focused on the financial advisor, either looking at practice efficiency, areas of new business, or as I said, talking about research like this. So I want to share with you a couple of the trends that are kind of shaping your future client from what the researchers at MIT are telling us. So living to age 92, you guys all know the longevity story, but I'll put it into some numerical significance. You got about a 50-50 shot now that you have a husband and wife, a 50-50 shot that one of the two are going to live to at least age 92. And MIT believes that babies born today will routinely live to age 100. They're not on the far out, whacked out first person to live to 150 has already been born scale, but due to improvements in infant mortality and especially new therapeutics, new medical devices, making life not only living life longer, but living better towards the end of life is changing expectations. In fact, at the pace at which the economy is moving, MIT is telling us that kids that graduate from college today, number one, a graduate from MIT, their education will be obsolete in approximately 10.7 years. In other words, everything they're learning today, unless they continue to go back to school, everything's changing so quickly. It's about 10 years now expiration. But what MIT also tells us is that if you're graduating college today, you can expect to have at least 3 careers during your lifetime. That's not 3 jobs, 3 careers during your lifetime. So no clue here, educational attainment is on an upward trajectory. You're now dealing and will continue to deal with the most educated population that you've ever addressed in your life. Now, folks, what Joe Coughlin, who heads the Age Lab, likes to say is keep in mind, education doesn't mean that I'm smart. It just gives me chronic attitude, right? And that's true. In fact, what we see, especially in younger investors, by younger investors, let's say age 45 and under, you're probably going to see folks who have a tape playing in their head that says, I'm a pretty smart guy. I went to a decent school, maybe even got an advanced degree. And what I said earlier, if I only had the right tools and the time, I could probably figure this out myself. The good news is the most successful realize they don't have the time. And so they're looking at you to be an expediter of solutions, right? Present me a range of solutions, but tell me what you would do and why. Doesn't mean I have to agree with you. Doesn't mean I'm going to lay it all down and say whatever you say because you're the financial advisor. Says I will still trust in your personal insight, but I want to make that decision myself. One important thing within the education trend, realize that women have been outgraduating men for the past 30, 40 years in colleges and universities. In fact, I think now the ratio is 3 women to every 2 men graduating from undergraduate studies, almost 50-50 on PhDs. So why is this important? Because you can follow education trends and wealth trends. Couple that with later family formation, maybe because of the educational attainment, whatever the cause. And what MIT says, in fact, Joe Coughlin in his book wrote an entire chapter called The Future is Female. So I'll just share with you, if you think it's more likely that she will be sitting across that desk from you in the next 10 years, more so than the last 10 years, well, then you better make sure you understand what's on her agenda. And the big one that's coming our way in our industry is that today, if you're dealing with a woman who's 47 to 57 years old, especially if she's the eldest daughter in her household, the care or management of the care of her parents may likely wind up to be her responsibility. So the new question coming to financial advisors is not necessarily about, it's just simply income streams. It's about, forgive me if I'm out of sorts today, but mom just fell and broke a hip. They're moving her to a rehab, and we've got 6 to 8 weeks to figure out what senior living community that we're going to transition her into. What the client doesn't have any idea of, and nobody's really there to help guide them. How much will it cost? How do you have this conversation? What are you likely to expect? Now, folks, I'm not telling you that as financial advisors, we have to be master of all trades. What MIT highly recommends is you start looking for experts or centers of influence. Let's say somebody that runs a senior care community or a memory care facility. Maybe some of your clients are currently using those communities and have had a really good experience. Being able to say to someone, would it help if I could introduce you to a friend of mine who runs the memory care unit down at XYZ, just to kind of help you set expectations. Think a little bit about some of the plans that you might want to think about. See, this is that added advice that I've been talking about. Another trend that you're going to see, and we're seeing it right now in the numbers coming back from the pandemic, is that many older workers don't plan to give up their day jobs. The beginning of the pandemic, older workers were leaving the workforce in droves. And what we're seeing right now is that they're coming back in exceedingly great numbers. A couple of reasons for that, one of which we're all too familiar with right now. Inflation is really scary to a 62-year-old who thinks about being retired for the next 30, 35 years. Maybe they hadn't planned on the market experience that they felt in the first year or two, but increasingly, what we're hearing about retirement from people who often go early is that it's kind of boring. It's hard to get them to express this. But one thing I want you to think about as you interact with your clients is that MIT says that there's an epidemic that exists that was here before COVID-19. It was largely centered in the male population. The epidemic was one of loneliness, isolation, and depression. Why so? Because today's retirement was actually designed in the 1950s, 1960s by guys like Del Webb, leaders in the finance industry. It was meant to last 5 to 7 years. So we go play golf, swim in the swimming pools, play a little shuffleboard, then cash in our ticket. Today's retirement, shared with you by those longevity numbers, it may last 20, 25, 30 years. That kind of retirement was not designed for that length of time. In fact, one of the biggest risks right now is losing mission and purpose. Why do people want to keep working? Well, because I really kind of liked what I did. It gave me an identity. Why, by the way, is loneliness so prevalent in the male population? Because after leaving their primary place of employment, oftentimes a man's social network collapses. What we see is women are often pretty good at rebuilding social networks. So oftentimes now, especially with what we learned during the pandemic, for certain professions, I may be able to go back to work, only now do it on my terms. working remotely, working from anywhere in the United States, around the world with a Wi-Fi signal, getting to define how I want to work in a labor tight market is shifting what people are thinking about working and retiring and the blending of the two. So I'm going to skip past a couple of slides because I do want to leave you guys with a couple of slides that I think are the most important in my presentation here, called The Future of Advice. And then Corey, if we have any questions, I'd be happy to take them. So this is MIT's model of the evolving value of financial professionals. So notice depth of relationship on one axis, breadth of discussion on the other. You'll see the big red line moving through the middle, moving outward, that MIT calls the value line, the value of a financial professional to their client. And the way they describe this is we basically all started in transactions-based financial planning, if you will. Client needed a stock, a bond, a muni. We went out, hunted one down, hopefully executed at a decent price. Depending on how that product performed, determined the client's satisfaction with our services. Well, over time, what we found was that if we couch all these different products together in the context of a financial plan, so we could show how the mutual funds fit with the muni bonds, fit with the life insurance, not only were we able to address a larger kind of section of the family, we now often had the decision maker and the spouse or adult children, but the client was actually willing to pay us for that plan. And MIT would tell us that the bulk of the financial planning industry is kind of stuck in this financial planning based stuff right now. In other words, if I deliver the plan, that seems to be like the summit of our experience together. But what MIT says is there's another band on the outer ring that they call longevity solutions professional. This is where conversations with clients start not around financial topics, but on life situations. I have that conversation to tell you that mom just fell and broke a hip and we're not sure what to do. I have the conversation that says, we're 67 years old now. We lived in this 4,200 square house for the last 35 years. The kids are gone. We can't climb the steps anymore. And we've got to think about where we're going to live going forward. How do we begin to think about transitioning where we'll live? Or I sold my business at age 58. I am bored stiff in retirement. What have other people like me done? Do they go back to work? Do they consult? Do they volunteer? Are there organizations that See, that's where in the longevity solution space, it begins with a conversation. Then our job as financial professionals, if we move back down that line, is to take those stories and interpret them into the context of a financial plan. Our job isn't done there yet. Then we communicate back to the client in terms of their story, why the financial plan fits their narrative. And it bothers me to all get out to tell you this as a representative of a mutual fund manufacturer. By the time you get to placing securities in that portfolio, the client doesn't even know or necessarily care because they've already trusted you to do the due diligence and selection process. So in the minds of, and by the way, I would tell you one more thing. If you think about drawing another red line, only this side from the outside in with the arrow pointing down towards the intersection, and you labeled that line engagement. I mean, when was the last time you had an engaging conversation with a client about PE ratios on their equity income fund? No, it just doesn't happen. But again, thinking about that engagement attention model, on the outside is where all those emotionally laden conversations go on. There's usually a triggering event. One thing we talk about all the time, it's not rational decision making that causes people to make changes in their portfolio. It's usually emotion that puts money in motion. There's a triggering event, something that happens says, we need to talk to Corey about this, right? So we move on down through the engagement path. And again, the most engaging of the conversations occur in that longevity solution space. So in brief, longevity-based financial professionals will educate their clients by sharing personal insights or experiences of other clients that you've helped. You'll think beyond just accountants and estate planning attorneys to connect people to other resources that will come into the environment as people age. And where do I find them, or what resources are those? Oftentimes, you can find those by observing your clients in their own natural habitat. What services are they using? Who did they say good things about? Right? Start thinking about building that professional network. Introduce and demonstrate technology solutions, not just showing them how to get to your website, but comes in and says, I just got this new iPhone, new iPad. I'm not even sure how to use it. Why not think about some of the ways you like to use it? Give them just some information so that every time they talk to someone else, someone says, John, you're not a tech head. You don't know how to use those iPhones. Who showed you how to do that? Well, my financial advisor did. They kind of help me with this kind of stuff all the time. And again, we would say there are issues that are going to be part of the conversation, either about your client themselves or about someone that they care about around housing, transportation, healthcare, and especially the one everybody takes for granted, social connections. How do I stay connected to my community? And how can I use my portfolio to help me do that? Because those social connections often involve memberships, travel, you name it. So in the end, one summary statement, a lot of times as we age, money becomes like electricity. It's kind of like a utility. Most of us don't get up in the morning, flip on the switch in the kitchen and go, huh, wonder where that power came from. Is that aqua? Is that nuclear? Is that coal fired? No. What we get excited about is what the electricity does. The light came on. The only time we miss it is when what we expect doesn't happen. So with that, Corey, I'm going to stop screen sharing and certainly open it up. Thanks for allowing me to share some of my comments this morning. But any questions, I'd be happy to do my best to answer.
Yeah, I think, John, just give yourself a pat on the back. I mean, look, you delivered a shitload of content in the last 27 minutes. So with that, I go to think of, like, it's almost overwhelming what you just dropped on us. So what would
Sorry
you
about that.
say? No, it's, I mean, fascinating and useful and helpful, but how would you recommend that an advisor implements some of these learnings? I mean, no one could get off of this meeting and apply all of it at once. Where would someone start? What would they want to think about?
So here's what I think about. It's one of the latest things I've been working with Joe Coughlin on up at the lab. In the retail environment, we talk about experience mapping, right? So empathy is one of the highest valued or highest sought qualities in a financial advisor. Sometime take a step back from your day-to-day practice management. And I want you to think about how your client discovers information about you and then begin to map their way through their experience. If they're coming into your office, how do they get there? How do they access your office? Who do they greet in your office? How does your typical client meeting go? And one of the things that I think is important to think about, Corey, and this comes from the psychology end of the lab researchers, is before you start that meeting, think to yourself, how would you want these clients to feel when they leave your office? Right? You want them to feel confident, especially, by the way, during election years, especially where everybody's head's ready to blow off because the media storm is just crazy. And add in there market volatility, nobody knows what's going on. How do you want your client to feel as they leave your office? And what can you do during the course of that experience to help them feel that? So I think that idea of experience mapping, and then ask yourself honestly, based on the experience that the client had, do you think they would share, unprovoked, that they would share the experience that they had with others? So ask yourself, what is that remarkable upside? How are you going to surprise that client on the upside? When I say that, Corey, I don't think you have to turn the world upside down. I'll just give you an experience from something that happened to me a few years ago. I was going out to speak to this RIA out in Michigan. I never had met this guy before. Extremely successful RIA up in the Lansing, Michigan area. So I get up to speak, and before I go to speak, he says, "Folks, I want to tell you something about John. John doesn't know I'm going to do this, but I happen to know that John has a daughter who's about to start her freshman year at the University of Tennessee." And he handed me this, Tennessee baseball cap. And I'm looking at him. I had no idea how he knew this about me. He had went through the hassle of calling our back office and asking to speak to someone who kind of knew me and ask if there was anything significant, a gift or something John was proud of Man, of all the speaking events that I think of, I still think of that guy, right? It was a baseball hat. But there's three steps that I would ask you, even in thinking about clients, Corey, that you might have met with recently. Think about this. Think about being able to contact one of those clients saying, Corey, I thought about you today, right? I remembered the conversation that we had about fill in the blank. And the third piece, I wanted to follow up with something that I think could help, or I wanted to send you this hat, or I wanted to offer this article, or so I thought of you today, right? I remembered, AKA I listened to you. And thirdly, I want to demonstrate to you that I'm doing something about it, right? Three pretty simple steps. We're usually pretty good at the first two. Sometimes a lot of things fall through the cracks on that third one, right? I want to show you that I listened. I want to demonstrate physically in some way that I heard you and that you're important to me. Personal is the new premium in the eyes of the MIT Age Lab. So I know you said give me one thing. I probably gave you three and overwhelmed you a little bit more, but that's the way it works.
That is the way it works. Hey, these guys know the deal. Guys, feel free to jump in. John's got a few minutes, and if you have any questions specific to your business overall, don't hold back. Is there any kind of literature? I know you got a little commercial in for Hartford Funds earlier. Anything on the MIT Age Lab that folks could look at?
Yes. A couple of things for you. So you can Google the MIT Age Lab. They have something called the Plan Network. I can't remember what PLAN stands for. Everything at MIT is an acronym. But the Plan Network is a network of advisors, right? Financial advisors, where MIT will sometimes ping you with research questions or for your thoughts on different matters. But in exchange, they'll often publish a white paper here and there. They may offer a webinar, an educational webinar that they themselves sponsor with outside speakers. The only other thing I would recommend, Corey, is that Dr. Coughlin himself wrote a book a few years ago called The Longevity Economy. It wasn't written specifically for financial services, but it's really a B2B book talking about how many of these demographic changes in his view are going to shape American business moving forward. So pretty interesting read, if you're interested in that. And as I said, the human-centric podcast, I would just share with you, don't think you're going to, get on that thing and hear a 20-minute pitch for Hartford Mutual Funds, because honestly, that isn't my gig. But I think you can look at the different types of guests we have on, because I think you're going to find some pretty engaging conversations. That's been pretty popular and something we're pretty proud of. So that seems to be going well as well.
Unless we have any open mics and any questions for you, Nick, I see you opened up. Do you have anything?
Yeah, John, I was just wondering, you mentioned going into the office. I work probably 95% virtual. Any research that Hartford or MIT Lab has done about the aging community receiving advice virtual versus in person?
Yeah, and we're just starting to do a whole lot more of it, because I think it's too recent yet to have any meaningful research. So what they would say is that they believe in the future, you're going to have to match the content of your conversations with the medium of your communication. In other words, if you're doing a portfolio review, right? If you're just trying to relate a new concept or an idea, hey, virtual may work great, right? If there is a more emotional kind of topic that probably should be done face to face, what they say is the face to face real estate with your clients will probably be less than it was pre-pandemic. It won't be eliminated, but reserve those face to face opportunities for the deeply diving emotional conversations that maybe help define your relationship with that client. We do believe that clients want to hear from you more frequently, only on a shorter basis, especially given, maybe a 10-minute check-in from time to time. And in that respect, you may be judged more harshly if you don't meet with that client more frequently. Like, why isn't Nick when was the last time we heard from Nick, right? Because in their minds, it's so easy to have that happen. The other thing I would share with you is we started to see it in the spring, and I was just joking with Corey, but from I would say from July on, the in-person client events. So if you think about why would I want to, do I want to just do one-on-one client meetings in my office? Well, you may have to do that. But if you ever do, and when I say group meetings for something fun, a wine tasting, when I say group, it might be 10 to 20 clients. That's the average size of our client get-togethers. All of the client events that we've done recently have been oversubscribed. Usually you lose a quarter of the attendees, like nobody's been canceling, and they've been staying like longer than I've ever seen. It's like the ones that would come to some kind of a group event, small group event, it's like they're thirsting for the social interaction. And, I can share with you from my team's perspective after Labor Day, everybody decided that like the leash is off and away we go. So I would just say, reserve those one-on-one conversations for the really emotional stuff. And I do think there's value in at least a couple of times a year thinking of a reason to either invite selected people or opening it up to a larger group to say, hey, we're going to get together to learn a little something, have a little fun, not talk specifically about your portfolio, but help to educate you on something, maybe based on your circumstance that could help. We're seeing that hybrid kind of thing coming back.
John, what do you think for advisors that might be serving the younger generation, the 40 to 50-year-olds, 35 to 50-year-olds, them, what would they take from your guidance and presentation in the sense of maybe they're not applying that research to the client and prospect, but they've got to somehow apply that for the client and prospect's parent?
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, you won't find me speak at a meeting where I'm not saying right up front that some of these issues might be something that you've thought about, but oftentimes what we hear is that it's not necessarily just about you, it's about those in your social network, right? So maybe it's a parent, maybe it's a sibling, maybe it's a child or a grandchild, right? Because it goes up and down. Many of us may be living in 4-generation families where you may be taking care of or even raising grandchildren based on what the experience of you, like everybody's so different now. But to answer that more directly, Corey, it's another area. MIT calls them the next gen investors. And we feel that there's a couple of areas here. One area I think has been severely neglected by financial services, the industry as a whole, is the couple with no children. When we think about retirement, right? What's the mantra? Well, of course, we'll retire and our kids will take care of us. But what we're seeing now, especially with demographic shifts, we may have an increasing population of couples that never had children, couldn't have children, never planned to have children, whatever it might be. How do we serve them? What should they be thinking about? And then lastly, we're looking right now at demographic shifts among younger ages. So I talked a little bit about education trends in women, later family formation, which means smaller families, if families at all, right? And in talking with some advisors that work heavily in this space, they say, my clients aren't necessarily as concerned about funding college education as they are right now about funding fertility treatments, right? How does this all work? How should I be thinking about it? So I think in order to remain relevant to these different groups, it's not enough just to band people together as baby boomers, Gen Xers, Gen Y, Gen Z. I mean, if you think about the baby boom generation, tell me that someone born in 1946 has the same worldview as somebody born in 1964. They're not homogenous like this. So we're trying to drill it down a little bit more to understand better the needs of younger investors, because forever our industry have said, well, they're just millennials. They don't have any money yet, right? They're going to have to wait till their parents die and pass it on. The millennials are now in their mid 40s, right? So, time is passing us by in this industry, and I don't think we're giving it enough attention. So it is a current topic of study for us.
That's
I
great.
appreciate that.
Yeah, quick question for you. So, I'm already getting great ideas based on the information that you provided today when it comes to servicing existing clients and how to differentiate in that model. As we think about potential new clients and prospects. Would love to hear how these ideas translate into that first or second meeting with a potential client, for that 35 to 50 range, and then for the older generation as well.
Yeah, there's a lot being written on it right now. So I'm going to tell you, in the older generation, I think the older generation is more apt to expect the traditional financial planning approach, right? Here's my assets, here's my liability, here's what I'm worried about. I worry about inflation. The younger generations, it seems to me, are more concerned about more holistic issues. So the conversations around what does money mean to you, what shaped your attitudes around money, your primary concerns are your primary concerns, but tell me, why is that, right? So almost getting across to and look, this isn't going to be for everybody. To a certain extent, you've got to be able to read the client in a certain way, but being able to say to them, the money's important and we'll get to that. But the way we work in our practice is, first, we need to understand a little bit about how you think about money and what money means to you, but more so, and here's the thing, like, we talk about hopes and dreams and goals and all that stuff. If you ask the typical client to describe their hopes and dreams, you're going to get a 30-second stream of consciousness that popped into their mind the moment you asked the question. So here's what I'll tell you. This is a little analogy that I use with clients, and I would use this with a new prospect. I would say, forget for a moment that we're going to talk about investing, planning, anything like that. Let's say, and I've had some advisors actually keep a jigsaw puzzle on their desk. Let's say that in the next 30 minutes, we're going to put together a jigsaw puzzle. If that's the case, what's the most important first step? Clients will always say the same thing. They'll say, find the corners, find the straight edges. Sometimes they'll think you're trying to trick them, and they'll say, like, flip the pieces over or something. All those are important steps. They're not the most important first step, which is you have to look at the picture on the box, right? Once you understand what the picture on the box is, then you can begin to assemble the pieces so that that image begins to come off of your box. I tell clients all the time, I think the most underappreciated aspect of working with a competent advisor is using them to help you clarify what the picture on your box looks like, right? So if I can just set the expectation, and this goes to, not to confuse you even a little bit more, but I want to plant this thought in your head. What if you thought of your practice as kind of a membership model, right? This is something Dr. Joe's pretty high on right now. He goes out to visit Costco and, you name it. And you think about it, people are willing to pay a fee to become a member in exchange for some value, right? But we've done a lot of work in this area of something called tribalism, where when we think about tribalism, oftentimes it has a negative connotation, like that's where prejudices come from and discrimination. True. But there's also a positive side of tribalism. That would be like if you decided you wanted to exercise, your odds of success are doing it are better if you do it with a group, right? So if we think about, in what ways is your practice a membership model? Because maybe a client is paying you an annual fee, right, for your quote unquote services. But if they were paying you on a membership model, this is a two-way street. What value are you offering to those clients for the fee that you're charging? But the other side of that is, what values do your members share in common? In other words, eventually you want that membership, you want that client to say, as a client of Corey Keating's firm, this is how Corey says we think about market volatility, or this is how we think about retirement income, or this is how. So reinforcing the values that you yourself as a practitioner, and I would ask you, maybe focus on the client in your book that you'd say, if I could build an entire book around people like this, they may not be the people with the most assets with you, but people with which you have the most in common. You hit it off. You think to yourself about what the traits of that client are, and then try to replicate that in other clients, right? Oftentimes we just, when we're starting our practice, we're like the Statue of Liberty, right? Bring us your blind, your weak, your lame. Look, can you fog a mirror? You're in, right? But that becomes a problem as we grow in success, because now we only have so much time, and trying to figure out who the right clients are it's a difficult challenge. So That's what I would say. I would say, think of your practice as a membership model. Think about offering educational opportunities. I'm big on just a couple of events a year for nothing better than to get people together. When I say people, perhaps clients and prospects, or mix the clients and prospects, because during the course of that evening, the prospect is going to say to the client, "Hey, have you been using Corey for a while?" "Well, yeah, I have." Is good, guys? "Oh yeah, Corey." Whatever happens in that interaction will do more for your relationship or potential business relationship with the client than anything I could say from the podium. So I think it's important to think about things that way.
That's a big one. I've never, for some reason, I mean, you guys correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like we've always segmented the two.
Yeah. And don't segment ages, bring them together, right? Put your 45 to 50-year-olds in with your 65 to 70-year-olds, because they'll both hear testimonies going, your clients will learn from each other.
Yeah.
And you'll get the credit for bringing them together.
That's super helpful. And as I think about my process, I start with a values conversation. So why is money important to you? Then we talk about goals and where they are today. I see that being relevant, very relevant based on what you said in the 35 to 50 range. Do you think it's as relevant in the, call it 50 plus range as well?
It can be. I would not neglect it, because again, remember, it's emotion that puts money in motion. There's usually a reason. I think Michael Kitces says the most important question to ask is, what brings you here today?
Yeah.
Right. There's usually something that gets that person into your office, something that spurred them to take action. What is it? Why now? I appreciate the time with everybody. And Corey, you have my contact information. I'd be happy to help anybody with any of our resources or any questions that are kind of hanging out there.
I will for sure share that with the group. And John, I appreciate the hour of your time so much. Enjoy Myrtle Beach. Good luck with everything. And I hope to talk to you again before another 10 years passes.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, guys. Have a great day.